Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Hey, Dave. How are you doing? Are you there?
And there we go.
Oh,
Sorry.
I think there was a time lag. You're all the way down in South Africa.
Yeah, it's bad, but it's not quite that bad. But anyway, my apologies. I am online. Welcome to Cape Town.
How are things in sunny Cape Town today?
Yeah, I don't want to mention the weather all the time, Chris, because it's must be depressing for you
It's,
English people. Because,
it's,
so it is autumn here and it's a cool 25 degrees. I was riding my Harley today with my t-shirt
oh,
on. But do we want to go there? Do we?
we don't today. No, thank you. um, so, to the uninitiated, Dave is an incredible coach. Also, you've got an incredibly varied past in terms of the businesses you've run, the things that you've done, the exits that you've put yourself through. So, can you give everyone who's listening a little potted history of who Dave Betts is and why OMG is so lucky that you're one of our coaches?
Yeah, you're such a smooth talker, Chris.
Oh,
Okay, all right. So I'm 54 years of age. I know I probably don't look like it, and I've been involved in running my own company since I was 22. So I've had 9 ventures, and all but one have been fairly successful. I have to say, I've been more luck than anything else. So I trained as an electrical engineer, and then realized I like people more than machines, and then went and did industrial psychology. So I can work out what's wrong with your electric and trying to work out your head at the same time. It's quite a weird concoction. So yeah, done coaching and change management for a number of companies. Run my own electrical engineering company in the UK. Started a number of charities, 2 charities in the UK. And then 2008 came to South Africa, where I saw an opportunity here in the energy market and started a company called Energy Drive, which I've been really busy with for the last 12 years. And I exited that September last year and decided I was going to go into semi-retirement. So this is me doing semi-retirement now.
Yeah, you've not done much.
Yeah. And then I decided to move back from London to South Africa because it's just nicer here. I think sometimes it's actually at the moment cheaper as well. And so now I'm involved in helping companies grow. That place when you got your first 5 or 6 employees and you want to go to the next 50. And that was where I think it takes the most skill, and I've got involved in helping them. And then finally, I'm working with the local university here, UCT and Stellenbosch, with their postgraduate program, helping young entrepreneurs get a grip and understand and work through how they can turn great ideas and change this nation called Africa.
And it's an emerging market as well, so it's you're in the right place. And I think there's a fantastic amount of opportunity when you're working with younger people as well. Digital agency people themselves are absolutely cutting edge from a technology point of view, full of entrepreneurial drive, usually don't know what they're doing. And I mean that as an ex recovering digital agency leader. It's very hard to learn what you don't know that you don't know. And
Yes.
this is where OMG Center comes in, and having people like you on board and people like you and Judith and things are fantastic to have along. So let's kick off, shall we, Dave? Should we start chatting about some stuff? So the whole point of this webinar for everyone's benefit today is to give you some kind of ungated coaching skills that you can use to better support your team, better support your staff, help your team to grow, also help you to grow. So kind of coaching skills that you can use that you don't have to read in a book. And hopefully you'll learn something from Dave. If you don't learn something from me, you'll probably learn something from Dave for sure. So
Well, both of us, let's go.
The first kind of talking point, I think, I find this is easier to say than it is to do, but being curious, asking questions, but actually listening to the answers is the latter part of that is the hardest thing. It's curiosity usually uncovers like those little black swan events, those opportunities that you might have missed. Being curious, asking questions is a great way to build trust. But you know, I know that you're one of the key areas of your coaching style is like people focused bit. So how would you normally go about this if you're trying to get an agency leader to sort of be a better curious listener?
Yeah, I, I think it all starts from a realization that the greatest gift any leader of any organization can have is the gift of wisdom.
Mm.
You know, we can have talents and skills and charisma and passion and all those great things,
Oh, I've got
but
them.
without yeah. And I find lots of young people, look at me, have them. But actually, the thing that turns that into success and us into great leaders is
Mm.
understanding that we need wisdom. Now, where does wisdom come from? Wisdom, firstly, comes from understanding that none of us has the full picture. None of us
Yeah.
understands really what's going on. So Stephen Covey has this saying, which is in his book, 7 Habits, which I paid my kids to read, by the way. And
You paid them.
yeah, my little
Great.
tip there. Always pay your kids to read books. They then read them. So I paid them to read 7 Habits, and I think they
Awesome.
still do it every year or so. And he says in the 7 Habits, seek first to understand before being understood. So it's the whole question of curiosity starts from the place of there is something I can learn from you.
Mm.
There is something I can learn from everyone every single day. And that is the heart of wisdom, right? Because I want to find out and understand. And so the question of asking questions comes firstly from the premise of, do I want to understand what this person is thinking, feeling, where this person's coming from? Rather than, do I just want to earn the right to give them really what I want to say?
That's one of the things that people get very wrong, right?
Right.
I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions so that then I can turn that very quickly into, well, can you get on with doing this then, please?
Right, exactly. And somehow we feel obliged to ask a question because it feels polite to do so, rather than when, if we really wanted to do it, we just barge in and tell them what to do and then leave. And
Yep.
but we feel quite English. We have to ask them, "How are you?" You know, we don't really care. We just ask the question, and before they've even told us, we're telling them what we want. But what I'm saying is the great leader, the good leader, genuinely asks the question because they realize that to seek to understand someone allows them to be understood. You know, there is this sense of, I want to know really what is going on. And so but that comes from wisdom. I want to increase in my wisdom, right? So
Yeah. One thing which I think is kind of really important to know is that, you know, if you're a leader, you don't get a day off from being a leader. You might have a day off of work, but you never really take a day off of being a leader. And I think that you've got to remain, you've got to work towards this kind of listening wisdom driver. You've got to try to get more out of yourself and others all the time, because if you have a bad day when you're in the office and you don't follow through consistently in the same way, it can have more of a negative impact on the team than it
right,
can if you're, you know, if you don't do it at all.
absolutely.
And it's
Yeah,
really, really important to kind of give a damn about what the answers are.
yeah, I love it, and that comes from being emotionally strong. If you
Mm.
not paid any attention to yourself, your inner self, your emotional strength, you go to work. There's no ways you're going to listen intently because you need emotional energy to
Yeah,
listen and seek to understand. Right. So I
absolutely.
love what you're saying. Weekend is, you're never off. Prepare yourself. Come to work emotionally strong. You then can be curious. Do you ever try being curious and understanding someone when you're absolutely dog tired? All you want to
I mean,
do
all the
is look.
time. It's really hard.
Yeah, there's
um,
that phase, right?
I
Um,
think the key thing to this as well is that, you know, leadership in and these kind of coaching skills that you can take into work, you can also live as well. You know, I find that what's the saying? You get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar or something like that. I can't remember the saying now, but you get more out of life by putting more into other people and genuinely being curious and asking the right questions, but giving a damn about the answers will will teach you something, but it will also mean that you're practicing what you preach outside of work as well. And I think that you just get better stretching that muscle all the time, but you get
Mhm.
more out of life because
Absolutely.
people will give more.
Yeah, the quality of life is determined by the quality of the questions you ask and the honesty in which you reply. Um, and I think if we live with that desire to be curious, to be asking questions, and then to reply with honesty, which is the next thing, because often we want to reply with what we think the other person
Mm,
wants to
yeah.
hear, instead of replying with some honesty. And it's the ability to not be argumentative, but to say that's an interesting view. Let me explore that from more.
Yeah.
If we had that, yeah, maybe the world would be so divided if we took that more of a case.
Yeah, I think, and you actually have to care. Like
Yeah,
you can't, and I mean this in the nicest way. Not everyone is a nice person, but not everyone has to be. Not everyone is always a bad person. You can, um, you can have a bad day, but
yeah,
don't take it out on someone else. Try and practice what you preach as much as you can, because the reality is you'll feel better if you get more out of someone else rather than having to sort of force the matter. I think
yeah,
a large thing as well is if you do the listening, you also should. Sorry, if you do the listening, you should also be expecting to be listened to, and
correct.
that's not a hierarchical thing. It's a kind of a quid pro quo part of being a human being. You don't want to just listen to someone all day long. I can't imagine what some of these like some talking therapists do if they go home to an empty house after hearing everything everyone else says all day.
Yeah,
But if you do a lot of listening, then you should expect to be listened to as well. And I think the only way to do that within a digital agency is to kind of see the other people come to you with things that they can show they've listened to you by either delivery of work or by just simply remembering your birthday. um,
absolutely. If I'm a big believer that if you do listen, I remember you don't just listen with your ears. You listen with your body language. You
yeah,
listen with your eyes. Do you look at them when they're talking to you?
mm,
Or do you look at your phone? You look with your whole being. Now, if you give somebody that level of time, remember, we live in a world that's fighting for your attention.
yeah,
If you give someone that level of attention, it will definitely be reciprocated, because that's the greatest compliment anyone can receive.
yeah,
Someone is giving me their undivided
yeah, yeah.
attention. Right?
And
Uh, yeah.
interesting question before we move on. May has just asked on Twitter, I think it's come from. I feel like I listen to my team, but always seem to get it wrong when it comes to managing them. Is it a me thing? I'm going to let you craft your diplomatic response to May.
I feel like I listen to my team, but I always seem to get it wrong. So the first question is, you listening but not understanding. So, and then when it comes to managing them, I get that wrong. I don't manage them well. You won't manage them well if you don't first understand. So, are you listening to tick the box of listening, or are you
Mm,
seeking to understand? So May, the question here is, you feel like you're listening, but what's the quality of the questions that you're asking?
yeah.
So it sounds to me like the quality of the questions you're asking need to be improved. Dig deeper, ask deeper questions.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think when if you are just ticking a box in anything in life, it's very obvious to other people, especially over time, and especially if you're the one that's managing them to deliver other things. Um, if you're not listening properly, but you're like listening for an outcome, then again, it's very transparent. So like Dave says, I think dig deeper and ask more meaningful questions. Um,
Yeah,
when it comes to giving and receiving feedback
yeah,
from a leadership point of view, in an agency in particular, there is an awful lot of different angles that feedback come from. They come from clients, they come from people internally to the clients, they come from people in the agency, external to the agency. Feedback is everywhere, but from a leadership point of view, dealing with your teams when it comes to feedback, I think it's really really important, and this ties very closely into listening. It's that um, you listen and you get listened to. And feedback, I think feedback, I don't know what your thoughts are here, is a bit of an art form, especially when you're receiving it.
It is. So they say feedback's breakfast of champions. You've heard that all the time.
Do
Yes.
they?
Drucker does. In my view, what people say and what people mean are often very different. So the feedback that I receive from people and what they actually would like to tell me sometimes are worlds apart. So I've always been a big believer in fruits and roots. The root of something is what I'm interested in, not the fruit of something. So if someone comes to me and says, you're always late, you're late, for this meeting, you're late for this meeting, that's the fruit of something. Actually, it's probably rooted in procrastination or lack of planning or lack of prioritizing, right? So just talking about the evidence, the fruit of lateness, without asking better questions or which lead to better feedback. So a feedback to someone that's always late shouldn't just be you're always late. The feedback should be, tell me about your diary planning and your prioritizing.
Oh yeah.
Now we're asking a root question of a fruit. So when someone gives me feedback, I tend to want them to ask them the root feedback. So if the root issue, they say to me, Dave, at your workshop, you did this and you didn't explain it that well. So I want to understand, well, how would you expect me to be explaining? What would be, give me an example of a better way of doing that. Let me understand the root of this question. So the trouble is feedback, if we take it at surface level, I think can be fairly innocuous. I think we need to take feedback and go a couple steps down with it and take the time with someone who wants to give you the feedback, right?
I think taking the time to listen, to take feedback and receive feedback is essential. When you're running a team as well, and in digital agencies, there's so much going on all the time. And it can feel awkward to follow a bit of a mental process when it comes to delivering feedback. But if you don't do things consistently and do them well, then again, it causes more harm than good. And, if sometimes you give someone one type of feedback around a deliverable and then another time a very harsh, short, not that well considered version, they don't know what to expect, that what might well be coming. And I think there's a few things which I've always found really helpful when it comes to delivering feedback, especially if you feel as a leader a little bit annoyed that something wasn't done quite right. Usually, if it's not been done quite right, you've either not trained someone properly, you've not delegated to them properly, or you've not managed them properly. But those things usually manifest as, oh, that person's done something annoying and I don't like them. Things that I've typically found when it comes to delivering feedback, and it'd be great to hear some insights from you as well, Dave, is that if you deliver feedback, negative feedback, but you deliver it relatively swiftly, then it's relatively quick in the mind of the person that you're delivering it to. But you've got to be very careful that you're not using emotion in there. So you don't use absolutes like always, or every time, or every day, etc. Because they'll say, well, there's this one time when that wasn't the case, so always doesn't exist, and fine, your feedback is irrelevant. Talk about things that you've seen, you've heard, or you've potentially felt. Hopefully you haven't felt anything physical. But if you talk about the things you've seen and heard, then there's something tangible to lock onto. And always, way before you deliver the feedback, consider what you want from that feedback. Do you want that person to just know that they've done something wrong? Well, that's not very good feedback, because there's no improvement from that beyond someone walking away thinking, oh, I've upset dad. What do you want to get from that feedback? Usually, and hopefully, the answer is, I want that person to deliver this better next time, or feel more confident delivering something, or ask for training, or whatever it might well be. And if you use the right language and you come into it with the end in mind, the outcome in mind, it's super easy to work out what it is you need to say. Then you've got it clear in your head.
I love it, 100%. Little phrase that I've learned: people need light, not heat. And we need to bring in our feedback in any of our conversations. We need to check ourselves first. Am I bringing light into this situation or just heat? So before you do any form of feedback to anyone, the first person that needs to have feedback is yourself. You need to, am I in the right place? Am I in a grounded, settled, okay place to bring
Yeah.
this? Or am I just going to bring heat into the situation?
Mm.
That's walk away, work it through, and try and split out what is light from what is heat. So you do the
Yeah.
heat. I love what you said. Ask yourself, what do I want? What's the result of this feedback? What is it?
Yeah.
Do I want this guy just to feel shitty for doing that thing?
Hopefully not. Yeah.
Right. I actually want him to improve, that I can improve. We can all improve together, right? That is. So then ask the question of your own feedback. Will what I'm saying lead to that outcome? And if
Yeah.
it isn't, let's adjust it. Okay. And then ask the question, is it rooted? Is it a root or is it a fruit that I'm giving
Yep.
feedback on? So, and then lastly, the difference between an event and a pattern is usually 2 or 3 times. So if someone's late
Very true.
once, you're giving feedback on an event. If they're late 3 times, you're giving feedback on a pattern. And so the thing to ask yourself is, which feedback am I giving? And then if it's a pattern, am I dealing with the root cause?
Yeah, I would think we're on the same page with that. I think it's so important when you're delivering feedback, like I said earlier, to kind of take that emotional bit out of it, and you can highlight that something wasn't quite right immediately when it happens, but you don't have to deliver the feedback immediately when it happens, because
Correct.
usually at that point it's the feeling is more powerful than the
It's
actual
heat.
what am I trying to get out of
Yes.
the heat bit.
Yes.
I feel like a broken record when I say this, and thankfully my grandmother won't know that I'm saying it all the time, but I say this an awful lot to people. My grandmother used to say, less haste, more speed, Christopher. So
Yep.
don't have to act fast, but in going slow, you can actually deliver things faster and better,
Yep.
and only the one
Go
time.
slow to go fast.
Yeah, and it stuck with me for years, and I didn't work out what it really meant until I realized actually it's kind of think slower, take yourself away from the situation.
Right.
Okay, cool. I'm aggrieved that that person's not done their job right. Probably haven't delivered the brief to them properly. Probably and in some way should have helped them a bit better. Maybe I delegated it incorrectly. I didn't have the time to help them through the process.
Right.
Now I feel a bit bad about this, but I've got to let them know it's not been done right, and we'll deal with it tomorrow. And then
Yeah.
by the end of the beginning of the next day, you can give them proper,
Yeah.
clear, concise, actionable feedback.
Now, I know that a lot of managers, leaders are listening to us right now going, what? I haven't got time for that. Just tell them what it is. Hit it. What are you on about? Meanwhile, in the real world, I've had like a billion emails since then, right?
Yeah.
And I want to go back to your go slow to go fast. The important thing is if we address these issues in a measured, thought through, bringing clarity way, go back to your first thing, curious way. Rather ask the question first before making the statement.
Yeah.
I noticed that when we were presenting to our client, you were distracted by your phone. Was there something going on that I need to understand?
Yeah.
Why was that? Rather than just saying, next time we do a presentation, turn your phone off. I think
Exactly. No, exactly. I think the other side of this is when you, as a leader, get feedback from your team. Now, sometimes that's quite hard because there's a hierarchy, and you don't necessarily like to hear something which you don't want to hear, especially from someone that hierarchically may well not be on your level. But they're still human beings, and it goes back
Yes.
to the listening.
Yes.
You're if you're willing to give feedback, you should be willing to receive feedback, but in the right way. And that's
Right.
when you should be teaching your team the right ways to approach feedback, the right ways um, to have that kind of discovery. What's the root I need? Identify the real root of the problem, or at the very
Exactly.
least have the critical thinking mechanisms internally to be able to
Yeah.
then come to someone and say, hey, this didn't go to plan. I'd quite like to get to the root of how to solve it next time, because it didn't help any of us.
I love that. And I think process. Good feedback goes to good processes.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
time and a place to bring feedback.
Mm.
And walking to the car on the end of a very long day is not the time to bring your feedback. or 2 minutes before you're about to go and make the biggest pitch of your life. Don't bring your feedback, Ben. It's there.
Yeah.
And as leaders, we need to create forums for feedback. Not, this is our time where people can
Yep.
go measure and sit down with us. We're in a good, I'm all right space. I'm prepared for it. You've thought about it. And then I think it creates the right safe, and that's the word, safe environment to bring good
Yeah.
feedback.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the key things to consider, I believe that, and I said a little bit about this earlier, that you don't always have the best of days. Not everyone, you don't know what's going on in everyone's life. Their cat might be sick, or they might have missed 2 buses and had to run in the rain, and all sorts of different things like that. But when you're receiving feedback, asking questions, listening to people, supporting people, you have to remember that they're not in your head and they don't know how you feel right now. So situationally, you need to know that other people might not be in the best place. So that's where you listen with your eyes, right? You're looking at body language and things.
First to understand before being understood. Let me understand where you're at.
Yeah.
Then you can understand where I'm coming from. I like that, Chris. Really good stuff.
And from another perspective as well, you need to know like the traits that the person that you're speaking to or coaching or leading has, and that means knowing your key drivers, but knowing their key drivers as well. There's certain ways that you would speak to one person that are ever so slightly finessed for another person because they behave and respond differently in slightly different ways. And I think if you know how they are situationally and kind of what their typical responses and drivers are to certain things, you understand each other better, which means that you can have much more collaborative work, and you can then have feedback which is negative, but because you trust each other, it's an awful lot nicer.
Yes, absolutely. And you have insight, in understanding. It's a theme we're building, right?
Yeah.
To understand the people that we employ, just not for what they do, but for who they are. They are human beings first and foremostly, and we need to understand them in order to work with them, get the best out of them. I like that.
Yeah. And sometimes, like let's say 50 emails have just come in. This has gone wrong. You've got a call coming up. Everything's going on around you. Lots of things are happening in that situation. And then someone does something, and you're not that keen on the outcome, or that you've got to lead them properly, or you've got to go onto a call with a bunch of people that you something's happened, and you're going to have to speak to them in a not so happy way later. It's super important to maintain that leadership mindset, and I think that I often say to the agencies that I work with, most of the time clients pay monthly and get their reports monthly, and team do their work on a monthly recurring basis and get paid monthly, and notice periods are monthly. Everything's roughly monthly. Some stuff gets updated weekly, but realistically, you don't need to act right now. If something's going on a million miles an hour, there's only so many things you can take at a time. And, when you've got an elephant in front of you to eat, one bite at a time is fine. And let stuff go.
I have a 48-hour rule. I used to help people who had an addiction to spending money on credit cards. And so I had a winning formula. I'm not sure it works these days, but before you could pay on your phone and all that stuff, I used to tell them to put the credit card in a plastic bag, fill it with water, stick it in the freezer. So what that meant is when they wanted to buy anything, they had to take it out, defrost it, dry it off, and then purchase it with the credit card. And every time it worked, it stopped them doing it. And so we apply in businesses I've run, we apply the 48-hour rule. No one's allowed to give feedback for 48 hours. 48 hours. Because what we want people to do is to go away, think about it, measure it, reduce the heat, bring some light in, maybe get some perspective on something, and then create the appropriate safe forum to bring that information to. So think of the credit card. Put your comments in the freezer for 24 hours.
Yeah, and very little. You should never kind of attribute malice to what may well be ignorance. And when something isn't quite right, it doesn't mean that they've done it intentionally. So if you stick it in the freezer for a little while, then when you come back to it, you spend a little bit of time and you're gone, that was just because
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
happened, something that they weren't prepared for, or weren't ready to be prepared for, or whatever else it might be, and
Yeah.
it makes an impact. Um,
It does.
when you know what's going on in people's lives, it makes it a lot easier to understand why you might not need to give feedback as well. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
let's say some work hasn't been perfect, but you know the person will solve it if you tell them the work needs to be redone or whatever. But they're going through a house move and their grand's just died and things like that. Well, you know that the feedback is probably going to be along the lines of, these are all the things that are happening to you. We get it.
Yep.
We'll take a little
Yep.
bit of work away from you. We'll help you however we can. How can
Yep.
we help you make sure because you're going to be, if you're doing your job very well, usually, and then
Yep.
you start delivering substandard work or attitudes change, it's usually the
Yep.
situation that's changed around you. You don't
So,
typically change behavior that much.
so that's a great example of fruit root questioning. You could make a statement about the fruit. You screwed up this piece of work that was needed.
Mm,
Or you could ask a question. Usually you're really accurate. And I noticed that today or yesterday you weren't quite so accurate. Is there something else going on? That's a root question.
yep.
So you're giving feedback, but you're doing it in a curious way, right?
Yeah.
A vulnerable way, as opposed to just I'm commenting on the fruit, which there's no problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and none of these things work unless you work on yourself as a
Wow,
leader.
100%.
And I know that you're really, really passionate about this. You're very, this is a big part of how you work with leaders, how you mentor people, how you spend time with people. And I spoke to a really lovely agency leader this week, and unfortunately, we said we can't work with them because they're not quite ready yet. They don't. If you, they're not quite ready to sort of articulate who they are themselves. You can see it that it will be very, very difficult to help them lead
Mm,
people and
mm,
without them following a checklist, if that makes sense.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and I've written this in the little speech bubble. This is something you've said: find your true north and align your thinking and leadership to it. And I'd love for you to talk about a little bit about this in a little
Mm.
bit of detail, because I know it's really important.
Yeah, so I guess this sums up really the core of my coaching. Really, so many people have their own roadmap, but if you don't have your own compass, you're going to find yourself getting lost.
Mm,
And the trouble is if you don't know where your true north is, you'll try and use someone else's compass to navigate your own map. And lots of people can tell me their plans for their life and their roadmap for their business, and their goals and their targets and all those things, but they get lost halfway through the process. And they don't get lost because their business plan was bad or their product was bad, or they get lost because they've lost themselves in that journey, right?
yeah.
So I call that true north. It's the who you are before what you do. And it's I work
Mm,
with postgraduates who are full of what they want to do. But if you ask the who are you question, because we do everything we do comes out of who we are. Okay. But if we are uncertain as to who am I, what is the drivers that make me, who's making me respond the way I am,
mm,
then when we go on this journey, and the journey is full of valleys and hills and all the rest, we can use analogies. If we don't know who we are, we have nothing then to point us to where we're going and why we're here. It's amazing. People start the journey in January of a year, and I get inundated with people saying, I don't know why I'm doing this anymore. Why did I start this company? Where am I on this journey?
yeah.
Why am I even, and
Why am I
they're not
putting myself through all of this stuff? Um,
right.
all the metaphorical punches in the face. Why am I doing it? And
Yeah.
if you can't answer the question, ask a few questions.
Yeah, start with the end in mind, which is again another Coveyism. I love that. And remember, everything starts twice. Everything's built twice. It's first built in the mind and the imagination, and
Mm,
secondly, it's built physically. If we short circuit the process and we try and build the plane while we're flying, we never really understand the full picture of what it is that's really inside of us, because we
mm,
don't do the work. And I'd love to say to any leader that's listening, do the work and do the work regularly. The work is, who am I? What are
Yeah.
my values? What are my principles? What are the guiding drivers inside of me? When was the last time you paid attention to those things? And I can't tell you the dividends it pays when we pay attention to the internal journey, how that gives us the guidance and the
Yeah.
strength of the external journey.
So beyond the kind of, I suppose, semi-obvious questions of like, why the heck am I putting myself through this? Because in digital agencies, it feels very on fire all the time. Usually,
Yeah.
you're either on fire because you've got loads of good clients and you're doing a really good job and you're spending loads of time hiring and doing all the cool grind, but you still feel tired and you're not sure what you're getting out of it because that future is still too far in advance. Or you're having the fire of client churn, staff churn, client issues, staff issues, etc. Obviously those two things are still you're gonna ask the question eventually, what the heck am I doing this for?
Right.
Now,
Right.
the nice version of it, from my perspective, I don't know how you feel, the nice version of it, when things are going really well, you still need to have that 3-5 year plan in mind, because the horizon's long. Things feel great now, but are you on track to deliver the thing that you are aiming for? And if you're not on track for the thing you're aiming for, what do you need to change and how do you work
Yeah.
on that? But you're still,
Absolutely.
yeah, and you're still asking those kinds of questions like, why am I doing this? Because it's bloody hard. And if you're having a negative series of things happening, you're asking the same question. So if you're beyond that question, beyond the why am I doing this, what kinds of things do you think agency leaders who are listening now can sort of internally ask themselves that will help them to kind of go, I need to work on this? Because eventually you're going to come up against it, and it's better to come up against it when you've got the time.
It does. So, I mean, it is the end goal. What is the end in mind? And why are you building an agency in the first place? You either, whenever a company starts, I always say, are you building this company to sell and get rich and then make lots of money, and that's great, or are you building a business to hand over to your children and have a name kind of somewhere? Is it a legacy business, or is it a wealth creation business? And define that right from the early stages and onsets, because it changes the questions, right? But let me just touch on these 5 drivers, because I think it goes to the heart of what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So every human being is driven by 5 things. And if you are feeling uncertain or you're feeling unsettled in any way, it will always be because of one of these 5 things, right? You're driven by security, the need to have money in the bank, a roof over your head, know where you're going to sleep. You're driven by variety. We need to know that there's something different happening. It's not the same old toast, the same old cereal, the same old work, the same old problems, right? So we need variety. We're driven by significance, the need to have meaning and make meaning. Does my agency live and change somebody's life more than just money, right? We driven by the need for personal growth. Am I growing, learning, becoming a better, bigger person, right? And finally, we're driven by community and connection. So security, variety, significance, personal growth, and community and connection. If you are feeling unsettled as a leader in any way, it will be because of one of those 5. And when we are making decisions about our future, we need all 5 ingredients in our decision making.
Yeah. And they should be in the back of your mind, right? You're not going to necessarily sit there with a checklist every time you're trying to come up with a decision. It should be something you work on over time and do
work, right? They're in us. Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I suppose when something isn't quite right, you can run that mental checklist somewhat, because you know that it's a situational problem that you can solve because of the reason you're doing this job. I know I want £10 million in the bank, and I also want to have 5 holidays and a massive family and loads of dogs. Well, I'm nowhere near any of those things. So very clearly, some of the pain that I'm having right now is because that's not attainable. Well, what can I physically change to get to there? Or do I need to change my mindset and my mind's eye of what I'm aiming for?
Yeah. So when the why is big enough, the how is usually not a problem. So if you are facing a problem today, and you don't know how to overcome it, the answer lies in defining the why, right? So the problem is never the problem. The issue is always the motivation, the why. So
Yeah.
if you're facing a problem as a leader in a business, I mean, I just exited a £50 million business last year, which we grew from zero in 12 years. There are a lot of problems in building that, right? So it's a
Yep.
global
Wasn't
company,
easy. You had
right?
hair when you started that.
And I used to have hair, and I was like 20 years old. Yeah. So, but I had a why. My why was to exit it so that I don't have to keep looking at earning my money. I can do something out of my heart, to like today, right? So if the why is big enough, the how is usually not a problem. And that why comes down to firstly doing the work. Why did I start in the first place? What's the purpose of this agency? Where am I going with this agency?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we start making big decisions, ask yourself, am I making this decision because I'm feeling insecure, or I need more variety, or there's not enough significance, or I'm not growing, or there's not enough connection and community? Fix those first before you go and, switch off your agency, blow it up, or those other things you do.
I had a conversation with an agency leader. I think I probably have a similar conversation every 6 to 9 months. It's ready to throw it all in the bin.
Yeah.
And then 6 to 9 months later, it's I need someone to buy it. And then 6 to 9 months later, it's throw it in the bin. And it's a cycle that repeats itself. But
Right.
knowing what you want, knowing who you are, those things those things shouldn't be the questions
That's
you
right.
repeatedly ask. And I think, a big part of knowing yourself drives you in that right direction. So Dave, to wrap up, I've got one question that I think, if you were to give one piece of advice to an agency leader to help them coach their teams to be better, what one piece of advice would you give? I think you've probably touched on about 50 pieces of advice here, so you're allowed to repeat, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to recap some of those things, then I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's there's so much.
Yeah. So seek first to understand before being understood. Okay. Make that a mantra. Walk into every meeting. The best sales presentations you ever make is when you ask questions first and make statements last.
Yeah.
Okay. So seek first to understand before being understood. Create a safe place for feedback, a place where it's mutual, you've got enough time, and ask root questions. Don't make fruit statements. So ask questions of roots, not fruit. Yeah, I should be a rapper. When the why is big enough, the how is usually not a problem. Therefore, always talk about the why before we unpack the how, or the problem that's in the way. Why are we doing this in the first place? And then usually the answer comes. And then lastly, what we need in every one of our agencies and businesses is light, not heat. We need to go slow and not fast. I think that wraps up all the little gems there.
Mate, wonderful. Thank you. As ever, lovely to talk to you. I think probably this is a hugely, I know, not to devalue this. This is a very small amount of being a leader, but it is in a massively impactful way to start the growth journey, to become a proper leader. And you've just got to take that first little step, as it were. So first, thank you so much for coming along, Dave. Dave's one of the coaches at the OMG Centre. He works with our agency leaders, very much focused in and around these areas, because that's what he's absolutely great at. And hopefully you can tell that he really does give a damn about this stuff. Our next webinar in a week or two's time is with the guys at the HR department. We're going to be talking about how to navigate the employee landscape like a boss. Really, really important at the minute, with lots of things going on in the world. You really do need to get the right people, but you also need to be able to look after those people, and in tough times, say goodbye to some of those people. So thanks again, Dave, and we'll play a nice little outro thing as we wave into the distance across
Greetings, farewell from South Africa.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much, Dave. Speak to you all soon.
Thank you. Take care.